Y'all will have to forgive me for not noticing that my pantry was covered in hundreds of teeny tiny red beetles. I had a newborn daughter, a toddler, and a kindergartner. I just returned to work at Temple Sinai on the far west side, and to say I was exhausted was an understatement. And Passover was just around the corner. I told my ex-husband, my then-husband, my wasband, as I call him, that I didn't have the energy to do Passover. I didn't have the energy to clean and to plan a menu and to bring out our Pesach dishes and to cover the counter. I just didn't have the energy. For years, I had taught that the act of cleaning for Passover was not just spring cleaning, it was an act of spiritual cleansing. Just as we seek to remove all leaven from our food, we seek to remove all leaven from our spirits, the things that puff us up and make us arrogant. And it's hard to feel arrogant when you're on your hands and knees scrubbing a floor or making one more schlep to the trash can. But that year, honestly, I already felt flat. So I told my husband we would eat kosher for Pesach this year, but we'd just put the matzah box in front of the cereal box. And that night, I swear, after I made my grand announcement, I opened the pantry to feed the dog, and a cloud of teeny tiny red beetles flew out of the dog food bag we'd just purchased a few days ago. And they joined their friends. They were already everywhere. Unlike weevils, who you can usually trust to stay in the flour and maybe the sugar, these little red devils were in everything. We had a package of unopened dried dates. They were inside it. We had a woven picnic basket. They were eating it. They infiltrated every single thing in our pantry except for the canned goods. And so that night, after we put the kids to bed, we started to clean. Y'all, I've never cleaned more in my life, I'll tell you. The pantry was nearly empty after we lugged trash bag after trash bag to the curb, so many that our neighbor asked if we were moving. It was crazy. The floor was scrubbed, then sanitized and scrubbed again. Every single food item in that pantry had to be thrown out except for our canned goods. And my husband made an emergency stop at Belden's, may its memory be a blessing, to pick up fresh Passover food. That year I didn't want to clean for Passover, but I had no choice but to clean for the beetles. If I believed that God worked this way, I would call the beetles a message, maybe a curse, maybe a gift. This is the bread of our affliction, we'll say in just a few days as we sit around our Seder tables on Wednesday evening, holding up our matzah. But we'll also hold up our matzah and say, this is the bread of our freedom. And this Shabbat, the one right before Pesach, Shabbat HaGadol, when I'm supposed to be giving you all of the laws for Passover, to prepare you, I thought that it would be interesting to think about these two types of matzah. Now, today, I have to be honest, it feels like Passover takes weeks of preparation. In the old days, the rabbi would speak on the Shabbat before Passover, giving just a few days for his, and it was always his on those days, to prepare for the holiday. I think that sounds about right. But now you have to make sure you get your Passover food. In my neck of the Houston woods, our supermarket displays one end of one row of Passover foods. 2 shelves are full of matzah, 1 shelf has gefilte fish, and that leaves 1 whole shelf for everything else, mostly macaroons. So we always order our food, or this year went to H-E-B. And the cleaning, well, you've heard me talk about how fun that is. But in days past, it was the rabbi's long speech on Shabbat HaGadol that started the Passover season. Now, not so much. So forgive me if I don't lecture you about the Passover laws. Instead, I want us to think about matzah. If we walked into any of the preschool classrooms here and asked the kids why, or the Sunday school classrooms, why we eat matzah, I bet we'd hear a whole variety of answers. So let me ask you all, why do you think we eat matzah on Passover? Very good. We didn't have time to let the bread rise. We put it on our backs and it baked as we fled to freedom. Very good. Any other ideas about why we eat matzah? No? Yes, I see a hand. Nice and loud. To remember the day that the Jews became free, that we got away from slavery and Pharaoh. Very, very good. Anybody else? Yeah. I love it. Tradition. Yes, exactly. That is not wrong. Yes, that's good. That's good. You know what? Officially, the reason we eat matzah is because the Torah tells us to. It's just, that's it. But, you know, we're liberal Jews. We're Reformed Jews. We're trained to wrestle with our texts. We're called to find meaning in every Jewish action that we take. So maybe it's tradition, but it has to be more. It has to be more than because it's in the Torah. The poster for matzah being the bread of freedom, is that we walked out with it baking on our backs. We eat matzah to remember that we are free. That's exactly right. Because Pharaoh finally said, you can go, and Moses led us into freedom. And so we grabbed that freedom with gusto and never let go. But matzah, also the bread of our affliction. The rabbis tell us it's what we used to eat when we were slaves. A simple flour and water mixture that could be made quickly, eaten when we worked in the fields or when we were making bricks, and it reminds us of that hardship. So it's a reminder of slavery. It's a reminder of freedom. How can that be? How can it be both? I think the Rabbi Lawrence Kushner speaks of this in his book, Eyes Remade for Wonder. In it, he tells the story of two Israelites who marched to freedom. Finally, they're free. They faced the terror of standing at the Sea of Reeds with Pharaoh and his chariots and his army and his horses coming for them, deciding if they would die by drowning or by sword. And then the miracle occurs. Moses lifts his staff, the wind blows, the ocean parts, and the Israelites have a clear path to freedom. Can you imagine what that must have been like? I don't know if you all remember the movie, the cartoon, The Prince of Egypt. I talk about it every year at this time because it's my favorite Passover movie. No offense to the 10 Commandments. Sorry, Dad. But it beautifully shows us what that might have been like. The water, a wall. Being able to see animals of the sea, lionfish and spinner dolphins, whales swim on either side, and we stepped over rocks, and we stepped through mud and puddles until we stood on dry land, free. But these two Israelites walking, let's call them Shlomo and Shoshi, they didn't notice the walls of water. They didn't notice the fish. They stepped onto that miraculous path. And Shlomo said, blech, look at all this mud. Ew, said Shoshi, my shoes are ruined now. Oh, why would Moses lead us through this muck? Shlomo said. Can you imagine what the end will be if this is the beginning? Shoshi despaired. They spent the entire time crossing through the split sea, complaining, only looking down. Not once did they look up to see the miracle that surrounded them. That's the bread of affliction. We eat this bread, we feed it to ourselves as a bitter reminder of all the bad things that have happened to us. Yes, we remember slavery as we are meant to, but the bread of affliction is also a metaphor for the times in our own lives when we only see mud. The times when we're so tired and stressed that we go home and say, I can't do Passover this year. The times when we're angry or bitter about something in the past that we would rather eat sawdust or matzah than recognize the reality of our now. We enslave ourselves and afflict ourselves because we can't grow out of our own stories about what hurt us, who hurt us, and how hurt we are. This is the bread of our freedom. We eat this bread, we feed it to ourselves as a reminder of every good thing that has come before and a promise of the possibilities that lie ahead. We know what freedom feels like, that expansiveness that seems to pull our chests open and allow us to breathe. It's saying no when we mean no, and saying yes when we mean yes. It's falling in love and staying in love. It's living life authentically. We free ourselves, we walk ourselves out of Egypt again and again in ways large and small because we hold on to the idea, the promise, that freedom is our birthright. That is matzah, the bread of affliction and the bread of our freedom. It was a great miracle of the split sea, and there was also mud underfoot. That is life, incredibly hard, with times of pain and loss and grief so profound that it cracks us open and changes everything. And it's incredibly beautiful, miraculous even, when we just sit on the couch and cuddle with our dogs or our cats stroking their smooth fur, or when we give our kids a hug and tell them, I love you, and hear them say, I love you more, and you know that it's not true. It could never be true. But you let them say it anyway. Or when you reach out a hand to your beloved, when you wake up from a bad night's sleep, and there they are. There they are always. Or when a friend calls you and says, let's go to dinner, and you eat and drink wine and laugh and share the warmth of the company. Or maybe it's when you go out in the morning with a cup of coffee in your hand, and it's not that humid for once in Houston, and you say, this is a miracle, as the birds sing. Life is a miracle, and it's so hard. And that is what matzah is too. Affliction and freedom. So those beetles filling my pantry, were they a curse, an affliction, or a blessing? A curse forcing me to clean when I was already bone tired. A blessing working next to my husband, laughing at the irony, seeing a sparkly kitchen when it was over, starting Passover with a fresh heart. Matzah, is it the bread of affliction or the bread of our freedom? Is life painful and hard or beautiful and miraculous? Are beetles blessings or curses? The answer in the end is up to each of you. But my answer, I know what it is. It's yes, and yes, and yes.